I have translated threats from 900 species, the translator whispered, his vocal cords clicking nervously against his upper mandibles. I have never translated a sling. The deck plating of the Dreven Vanguard flagship vibrated at a relentless frequency. The translator felt the tremor deep within the hollow bones of his folded wings. Bridge lighting had been locked on combat red for so long that the white spectrum emergency flash looked entirely wrong when a junior officer accidentally toggled it. The translator possessed 22 years of immaculate service records. He was analytical by rigorous training, but analysis routinely failed when incoming data made absolutely no logical sense. The Vanguard fleet had been bombarding a contested outpost station for the better part of the cycle. Plasma bombs and graviton lances painted the void in blinding streaks of violent violet. The station's defensive shields were actively buckling under the tremendous pressure. Yet, approaching directly from the station's starboard flank was a single, solitary vessel. It was a sub-frigate class cargo hauler. It possessed a hand-welded hull patched with mismatched scrap metal. It carried no energy shielding. It mounted no weapons array. It was broadcasting an unencrypted radio signal that the flagship's matrix stubbornly classified as music. A half-empty ration tube of nutrient paste sat forgotten next to the translator's primary console, its metallic seal crusted over from neglect. The mundane reality of his unfinished lunch contrasted violently with the glowing tactical display. It was music. He was playing music. The bridge crew should have been terrified by the sheer impossibility of the situation. The Admiralty heavily redacted the records of what happened next. Listen closely, because the actual events are far stranger than any official fleet report. The tactical feed zoomed in on the approaching vessel. The translator's wing joints locked mid-fold. It was a primal flight or fight freeze. The scan results had returned clean, much too clean. There were no digital systems on board the hauler. There was no targeting computer. The threat classification matrix stalled entirely. The main screen flashed in harsh yellow text. Category: none. Damage: critical. Visual feeds pierced the hauler's scratched cockpit window. The pilot was a human. He was male, perhaps 44 standard planetary cycles in age. He was decidedly not wearing military vacuum armor. He wore a heavy leather apron draped over forge-scarred arms. Tied securely to his thick tool belt was a simple leather pouch. It was soft, heavy, and roughly palm-sized. It looked like the kind of crude carrying sack of planetary labor might use to hold spare rivets or loose currency. It visibly clinked against his thigh when he shifted his weight. The hauler did not alter its erratic course. When hailed and strictly warned that he was entering an active military exclusion zone, the human had casually keyed his open-channel communications. I know. That's why I'm here. The vessel slowly breached the flagship's outer perimeter. The Dreven shields were an undisputed marvel of modern warfare. They were perfectly calibrated to absorb and disperse directed energy, plasma bursts, and concentrated radiation. They were blind to physical mass. A solid object moving below weapons-grade velocity passed through the protective mesh like a stone dropping through standing water. The translator's 4 jaw segments opened simultaneously. It was an anatomically impossible stress response triggered by pure cognitive dissonance. His internal thermal signature plummeted to ambient room temperature. His feather analogs flattened tightly against his skin. His evolutionary biology was screaming at him to blend into the shadows and disappear. On the ultra-high-definition visual feed, the absurdity escalated exponentially. The human was moving away from his helm and stepping toward the vessel's primary airlock, which meant the human was preparing to open the door into the tactical matrix could not compute the next variable. There were no automated sequencing lights flashing. There was no decompression warning klaxon sounding in the cabin. The human named Mercer simply gripped a heavy, physical iron lever and pulled it downward with his bare, calloused hands. He stepped out into the absolute zero of the void. He was tethered by a thick, braided fiber rope. Not a magnetic grapple. Not a hard light tether. A rope. The translator watched in paralyzed silence as the human drifted out of his depressurized airlock and swung in a slow arc toward the flagship's expansive dorsal hull. The heavy leather pouch dangled ominously from his hip. Hull vibration sensors flared to life across the bridge displays. The audio feed piped a rhythmic, heavy thudding directly into the command center. The advanced acoustic dampeners could not distinguish the human's heavy work boots from the ship's own internal engine resonance. He was walking on the hull, outside, in a leather apron. The human reached his tool belt. He placed a scarred hand over the leather pouch and began to loosen the crude, not tying it shut. The translator watched the ultra-high-definition visual feed in a state of sheer, suspended animation. Mercer reached into the deep pocket of his apron and withdrew a fistful of small, perfectly spherical steel objects. He deposited 47 hand-forged ball bearings directly into the pouch. He gripped the long, braided leather straps attached to the opening, securing them tightly around his scarred fingers. He swung his right arm backward. The leather pouch spun in a rapid, blurring arc against the vast backdrop of deep space. He stepped into the motion, planting his heavy boots onto the metallic hull, and released one side of the leather strap. The steel ball bearings, each weighing precisely 12 grams, launched outward in a chaotic spread pattern, utilizing raw centrifugal force to accelerate the primitive projectiles to 73 meters per second before they violently struck the exposed optical elements of the flagship's primary dorsal sensor array. The sophisticated array was meticulously shielded against focused radiation, disruptive electromagnetic interference, and superheated plasma. It was absolutely not shielded against tiny spheres of solid iron. Warning klaxons finally screamed to life across the command deck. 7 of the 12 main sensor nodes shattered instantly upon kinetic impact. The tactical display fragmented into jagged lines of static before attempting to recalibrate. With the dorsal sensors suddenly rendered completely blind, the flagship's master targeting solution degraded by a catastrophic 61%. The relentless bombardment of the outpost station below became wildly inaccurate, forcing the gunnery officers to halt their fire. The translator realized the terrifying strategy with sickening clarity. The human did not understand driven sensor algorithms or advanced optical matrices. He was simply following an archaic logic passed down through thousands of generations. Blind the eyes before you try to stop the hands. The Admiral, his facial plates flushed with vibrant purple rage, barked in immediate order to open a direct, unencrypted comm channel to the hauler. Static hissed sharply from the overhead speakers. "Sorry about the mess." Mercer's relaxed voice crackled over the bridge audio. "I can fix those sensors if you want. I am a blacksmith. I am pretty good with metal." The command center descended into a profound, heavy silence lasting exactly 11 seconds. On the secondary visual feed, Mercer finished tying the empty leather pouch back onto his thick tool belt. He cycled the manual airlock, stepped back inside his cabin, and sat down heavily in his worn pilot seat. He had nothing left to throw. He had used every piece of ammunition he brought. It was enough. "Explain this," the Admiral demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating low that rattled the glass displays. "What weapon system is that? What cloaking technology bypasses our matrix?" The translator pulled up the central historical database, his digits visibly trembling over the glowing interface. He accessed file DWD-47. The ancient text scrolled rapidly across his personal screen. He felt a sudden, terrible exhaustion settle deep into his hollow bones. Humans used kinetic projectiles for 30,000 years before they discovered combustion propulsion, the translator said aloud, the words tasting completely alien on his tongue. 30,000 years. They threw stones, metal spheres, and shaped bullets. They spent entire millennia perfecting the precise art of throwing physical objects before they ever learned to burn them. He looked up from his monitor, meeting the Admiral's furious gaze. This man used a sling, a weapon so incredibly old his own species considers it archaeological. The bridge crew stared at him in stunned silence, which meant the entire tactical paradigm was fundamentally wrong. Our shields were designed strictly for the future, the translator continued, his voice steadying with grim certainty. He attacked us with the deep past, and the past went straight through our shields like they were not even there. The Admiral processed the impossible data flowing across his screens. The ratio was devastating. 14 million credits worth of optical sensors destroyed by perhaps 3 credits of scrap iron. He slowly ordered the communications officer to issue a formal surrender demand to the cargo hauler. The translator reached up to his high collar. He unclasped his silver rank insignia, the polished metal still warm against his skin, and placed it deliberately onto the glowing glass console. Translate your own threats. I am done. The bombardment of the station ceased entirely. The heavily armed escort wing, having just witnessed a lone blacksmith effectively disable a flagship with primitive ball bearings, flatly refused to re-engage the enemy. A formal ceasefire was hastily negotiated within the hour. Mercer was not part of those complex geopolitical negotiations. He was busy repairing his manual airlock lever, which had bent slightly during the operation. The post-action maintenance report would officially state that the dorsal array was disabled by an unknown kinetic weapon system. The translator had already typed a blunt margin note before logging out for the final time. It was a bag of metal balls thrown by a man in a leather apron, he wrote. He had now fought the Dreven fleet. He had outremembered them. He had perfected 30,000 years of throwing rocks. The translator muttered one final observation as he walked off the bridge. You spent 1 trillion credits on shields. I spent an afternoon at the forge. 6 days later, the formal ceasefire was officially signed. Resting atop the Admiral's polished desk sat a soft leather pouch. It contained a single steel bearing and a handwritten note instructing them to remember what it did. Above them, the bridge lights finally shifted from combat red to stand-down white, one bank at a time. The acrid scent of ozone faded. Somewhere in the vast docking bay, a hand-welded cargo hauler sat quietly, its airlock lever freshly straightened.